Coming in at number 5, SHGB02 plus 14A. Yeah, that's a mouthful. This is an astronomical radio source and is a candidate in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, discovered in March 2003 by SETI at home. Now, the source was observed 3 times for a total of about a minute at a frequency of about 1420 MHz, one of the frequencies in the waterhole region, which is theorized to be a good candidate for frequencies used by extraterrestrial life to broadcast contact signals. Now, the region it hailed from is usually devoid of any nearby stars. The closest star systems in approximate region of the signal include the binary star G7311A and B, which are 106.1 light years from the Sun. Although the unrelated star G7310 is only 108.7 light years away, less than 3 light years from G7311A and B, all of these stars are red dwarfs, which is the smallest and coolest kind of star on the main sequence, and are by far the most common type in the Milky Way. Now, there are a number of puzzling features of this candidate which have led to a large amount of skepticism. The source itself is located between the constellations Pisces and Aries, a direction in which no stars are observed within 1000 light years from Earth. It is also a very weak signal. The frequency of the signal has a rapid drift, changing between 8 and 37 Hz per second. Now, here's where things get interesting. If the cause is Doppler shift, it would indicate emissions from a planet rotating nearly 40 times faster on its axis than the Earth. Each time the signal was detected, it was again at about 1420 MHz, the original frequency before any drift. Of course, there are many explanations for the signal, but many are purporting an artifact of random chance, cosmic noise, or even a glitch. I'm here for aliens though. I always am. Coming in at 4, FRBs. One of the biggest mysteries out there in the universe is, of course, is there something other than just us, or are we alone in the universe? That's the question. Well, as of August 14, 2019, we have inched closer to an answer. An astonishing 8 new repeating audio radio signals known as fast radio bursts, aka FRBs, have been detected flaring from deep space. Very creepy indeed. At the beginning of 2019, just one of these signals was reported to flash repeatedly. However, in January, scientists reported a second repeating one. This means we're beginning to build a statistical database of repeaters, which would help astronomers figure out what these signals actually mean. These FRBs are perplexing and are detected as spikes in radio data lasting just a few milliseconds, but in that time they can discharge more energy than 500 million suns. I quote, "Just as some volcanoes are more active than others, and you can think a volcano as dormant because it has not erupted in a long time, this can be said about FRBs. There is also a frequency drift. The first 2 repeaters showed a downward drift in frequency, with each burst getting successfully lower, kind of like a sad trombone sound effect. As of right now, scientists are attempting to figure out where the FRBs are hailing from and what exactly the signals mean. Perhaps it is from extraterrestrial life, telling us they're out there, or perhaps it's something far more sinister." Coming in at number 3, Tabby's star. Also known as KIC 8462852, Voyager star or WTF star is an F-type main sequence star located in the constellation Cygnus, approximately 1,470 light years from Earth. Unusual light fluctuations of the star, including up to a 22% dimming in brightness, were discovered by citizen scientists as part of the Planet Hunters project. In September 2015, astronomers and citizen scientists associated with the project posted a preprint of an article describing the data and possible interpretations. The discovery was made from data collected by the Kepler Space Telescope, which observed changes in the brightness of distant stars to detect exoplanets. Now, Tabby star is not the only star that has large irregular dimmings, but all other such stars are young stellar objects called YSO dippers, which have different dimming patterns. Now, several hypotheses have been proposed to explain the star's irregular changes in brightness, as measured by its light curve, but none to date fully explain all aspects of the curve. One explanation is that an uneven ring of dust orbits Tabby's star. Another explanation is that the star's luminosity is modulated by changes in the efficiency of heat transport to its photosphere. One external obscuration is required. Now, a third hypothesis, based on a lack of observed infrared light, posits a swarm of cold, dusty comet fragments in a highly eccentric orbit. However, the notion that disturbed comets from such a cloud could exist in high enough numbers to obscure 22% of the star's observed luminosity has been doubted. It has also been hypothesized that the changes in brightness could be signs of activity associated with intelligent extraterrestrial life 2005 constructing a Dyson swarm. However, further analysis based on data through the end of 2017 showed wavelength-dependent dimming consistent with dust, not an opaque object such as an alien megastructure. Again, I'm still going with aliens. It's always aliens. Coming in at number 2, WOW signal. The WOW signal was a strong narrowband radio signal received on August 15, 1977 by Ohio State University's Big Ear Radio Telescope in the United States and used to support the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The signal appeared to come from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius and bore the expected hallmarks of extraterrestrial origin. It was Jerry R. Amon, an astronomer, who discovered the anomaly a few days later while reviewing the recorded data. He was so impressed by the result that he circled the reading on the computer printout and wrote the comment "wow" on its side, leading to the event's widely used name. The signal itself lasted for the full 72-second window, during which Big Ear was able to observe it, but has not been detected since, despite several subsequent attempts by Amon and others. Many people have made assumptions about the source of the sound, including natural and human-made sources, but none of them adequately explains the signal. To this day, the WOW signal remains the strongest candidate for an alien radio transmission ever detected. And finally, coming in at number 1, the Giudica Cordiglia brothers. The Giudica Cordiglia brothers are two Italian former amateur radio operators who made audio recordings that allegedly support the conspiracy theory that the Soviet space program covered up cosmonaut deaths in the 1960s. The brothers claim to have acquired recordings of several secret Soviet space missions that ended in tragedy and mystery. This has of course generated public interest for more than 50 years, despite there being a large number of detailed rebuttals to the brothers' claims. In the 60s, the brothers claimed to have heard radio communications taken from the secret space missions, including the dying sounds of a suffocating lost cosmonaut. One of their most famous recordings was made on November 28, 1960. After about an hour of listening to static, the brothers recognized an SOS signal that seemed to be moving away from the Earth. In 1963, the brothers claimed they recorded the voice of a female cosmonaut entering the Earth's atmosphere in a malfunctioning spacecraft. In the recording, she is heard to have cried out, "I'm hot," as it burnt up. In total, the Giudica Cordiglia brothers released 9 recordings over a period of 4 years. The details were as follows. May 1960, a crewed spacecraft reports it is going off course. November 28, 1960, a faint SOS Morse code signal is sent from another troubled spacecraft leaving Earth's orbit. February 1961, a cosmonaut is audibly recorded suffocating to death. April 1961, a capsule is recorded orbiting the Earth 3 times before re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, days before Yuri Gagarin made his historic flight. May 1961, an orbiting spacecraft makes an appeal for help after going out of control. October 61, a cosmonaut loses control of his spacecraft, which veers off into deep space. November 1962, a space capsule misjudges re-entry, bouncing off the Earth's atmosphere and out into space. November 1963, a female cosmonaut dies during re-entry. April 1964, another cosmonaut is killed when his capsule burns up in the Earth's atmosphere. Since the 60s, critical analysis of the recordings has cast doubt on their provenance. For instance, audio transcripts reveal that none of the cosmonauts were supposed to be Soviet Air Force pilots, followed standard communication protocols such as identifying themselves when speaking or using correct technical terminology. Fishy fishy. Still, I have doubts. I think something greater is going on here. In at number 5, we have the Soyuz 11. On June 6, the cosmonauts Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev were launched into space aboard Soyuz 11 on a mission to dock and enter Salyut-1, the Soviet space station that had been placed in orbit in April. The mission's goal was to set a record for the longest time spent in space. The spacecraft successfully docked with the station, and the cosmonauts spent 23 days orbiting the Earth. On June 30th, they left Salyut-1 and began re-entry procedures. When they fired the explosive bolts to separate the Soyuz 11 re-entry capsule from another stage of the spacecraft, a critical valve was jerked open. 100 miles above the Earth, the capsule was suddenly exposed to the nearly pressureless environment of space. As the capsule rapidly depressurized, Patsayev tried to close the valve by hand but failed. Minutes later, the cosmonauts were dead. They became the first people to ever die in space. The last message that they sent to Earth was them trying to scream for help, but they couldn't due to the loss of pressure. All they heard from the crew was them gasping for air and then popping sounds from the air in their lungs expanding. The spacecraft landed itself perfectly on Earth, fully intact. When it was opened, they found the remains of the crew, with blood dripping from their ears and nose, and their skin had turned blue due to the lack of oxygen. Not many today have heard the recording, but it is sure to send chills down anyone's spine hearing these poor men last few minutes in space. In at number 4 we have WOW. In 1977, the sound of extraterrestrials were heard by human ears for the very first time. The WOW signal was detected by astronomer Jerry Ehman using Ohio State University's Big Ear radio telescope. It is a radio signal detector that was pointed at a group of stars called Chi Sagittarii in the constellation Sagittarius. When scanning the skies around the stars, Ehman captured a 72-second burst of radio waves. He circled the reading and wrote "Wow" next to it, hence the signal's name. He was desperately searching for the signal to get a second reading, but he never found it again. Over the last 40 years, the signal has been cited as evidence that we are not alone in the galaxy. Experts and laypeople alike believe that finally we had evidence of alien life. The WOW signal is the strongest signal we have ever received from space. We may never know who or what caused the signal, but it is the strongest proof Earth has ever had that there is something else out there. Hopefully, whatever it is, it's peaceful or like Earth. In at number 3 we have Lost Cosmonaut. The Lost Cosmonauts are subject of a theory alleging that some Soviet cosmonauts went to outer space, but their existence has never been publicly acknowledged by either the Soviet or Russian space authorities. The Soviet Union attempted to launch human spaceflights before Yuri Gagarin's first spaceflight, and those cosmonauts on board died in those attempts. Two brothers who were former amateur radio operators made audio recordings which support the theory that the Soviet space program covered up cosmonaut deaths in the 1960s. One of the recordings in question is from November 1963. The recording is of a woman who died on a solo mission into space. In the recording you can hear her screaming. She is shouting about how the capsule is heating up. You can hear her screaming it is getting hot. She is frantically looking for someone to help her, but once she was up there she was on her own. It is believed the capsule burned up on re-entry and the woman died. When asked about the recording, the Soviets claimed that the space mission was unmanned and no woman died during re-entry. The evidence seems to prove this wrong, and their denial proves the possibility of the cover-up. In at number 2, sounds of Saturn. The ringed planet and its moon Enceladus have a lot to say to each other. Though it's been gone for nearly a year, the Cassini spacecraft continues to fuel new studies of Saturn and its many moons. In particular, Cassini's unique and close-up view of the system during its grand finale orbits produced data that have revealed how plasma waves moving outward from the planet interact with both its rings and its moons. Now, in a video produced by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory using this data, you can tune into the sounds of Saturn, the radio emission generated by these plasma waves as they travel along the invisible magnetic field lines linking the planet with its icy moon Enceladus. As it plunged closer to the planet during its grand finale on September 2, 2017, Cassini's radio and plasma wave science instrument picked up electromagnetic waves as it traveled through the Enceladus flux tube, a sort of conduit between the moon and the planet, bounded by magnetic field lines and through which charged particles can flow back and forth. The waves fall in the range of human hearing, and scientists have now amplified them into the audio file below, compressing about 16 minutes worth of data down to 28.5 seconds of scary space sounds. Finally, in at number 1 we have Milky Way signal. A fast radio burst was detected from within our galaxy for the very first time. We may be closer to uncovering its origin. On April 28, 2020, 2 ground-based radio telescopes detected an intense pulse of radio waves. It only lasted a mere millisecond, but for astonished astronomers it was a major discovery, representing the first time a fast radio burst, or FRB, had ever been detected so close to Earth. Located just 30,000 light-years from our planet, the event was firmly within the Milky Way, and it was, to all intents and purposes, almost impossible to miss. The Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Mapping Experiment certainly had no problems picking it up. I quote, "We weren't even looking in the right direction and we still saw it loud and clear in our peripheral vision," one of them noted. One of the major problems with detecting FRBs, aside from most of them having been so far away, is that they are so fleeting. They've been and gone in the blink of an eye despite being 100 million times more powerful than the sun. They can release as much energy in a few thousandths of a second as the sun in 100 years. Ideally, astronomers would discover an object and focus one or more different telescopes at it, but the ephemeral nature of these bursts removes any such opportunity. But despite these challenges, astronomers have succeeded in building up a bank of knowledge about FRBs, most of which has been based on the dozens of recorded events from beyond our own galaxy. For starters, we know they are bright flashes of radio light lasting from microseconds to milliseconds. All sky searches for them also suggest that thousands of these bursts occur in the sky every single day. It'll take many years of research to understand exactly what these signals mean. Until then, we can just wonder about what is out there among the galaxy.
Number 5 on this list is danger. Maybe this number on the list would be better titled risk versus reward, honestly, because that's basically what it boils down to. Space travel is by far the most dangerous form of travel that we have. Like, everyone has heard someone tell them before that whenever you get in a car, you are taking a risk, which is true. You could get in a car accident at any point in time. But a lot of times, those car accidents result in little fender benders, and for the most part, nothing major. If your space shuttle breaks down though, like even if a tiny little thing goes wrong, then that is very likely the end of your entire existence. And obviously, we've seen this happen before. Several space shuttles have exploded or malfunctioned, and astronauts have in fact died because of it. There's always going to be an immense danger when someone steps into a space shuttle, and they're going to be risking their lives. Now, if the reward was incredible, then it might be worth it, but as we're going to talk about later in this video, the reward might not be that great. Like, at the end of the day, I truly don't think that I would be willing to go to space. I have the utmost respect for those who do decide to do it, but I just don't know if it's for me. The danger is just a bit too high. Number 4 on this list is aliens. Aliens, although unlikely, need to be considered when determining whether or not to go to space or not. If there is a risk that we could run into aliens and in the process of doing so, piss those aliens off, then that would really not be very good for any of us. There have been tons of stories about aliens and the possibility of them being out in the universe at this point. In fact, I think it's pretty much an accepted belief that if the universe is infinite, then there has to be life somewhere else in the universe. But it could be closer than you think. One famous story is that of the Knock. Tanya Sirohi writes, "First off, there's no sound in space. There's only vacuum. And this is precisely what makes this story a strange one. Back in 2003, astronaut Yang Liwei, the first to be sent into space by the Chinese space program, was sitting in his space shuttle when he reportedly heard a knock. He described it as someone knocking the body of the spaceship, just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer would sound. Apparently, he's not the only one to have experienced this. There were other Chinese astronauts between 2005 and 2008 who've reported hearing similar sounds. A lot of people have heard this story and credited it to being aliens. A lot of people have heard this story and credited it to being aliens that caused the sound. If that's the case, then it's something NASA really needs to consider if they ever want to go to space again. Number 3 on this list is space snakes. Now, I'm gonna be honest guys, this one is just kind of silly, but I honestly just wanted to throw it in here because it really does make for a good story. And let's face it, if this story is actually true and it's all real, then I also would think twice about making another mission to space as well. Tanya Sirohi says, retired NASA astronaut Dr. Story Musgrave has a lot to his credit. So it would be difficult to pass this off as a lie, but he claims he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. It's not hard to imagine that this could have been a hose detached from the spaceship, but Musgrave, he remains adamant. So once again folks, I want to reiterate that this is a bit of a silly entry, but if we suspend our disbelief for just 1 second, then it gets pretty terrifying pretty quickly. If there is actually just a bunch of giant white snakes floating through space, then I don't know if there's actually a large enough sum of money that you could pay me to go and fly into that. Also, who knows what these things would even be capable of? Maybe they're super smart and we just have no idea. I, for one, do not want to be the person having to find that out. Number 2 on this list is Elon Musk. So I entitled this entry Elon Musk, but ultimately it's just billionaires in general at this point. For some reason, it's not enough for these guys with billions of dollars to just own some fancy cars and yachts. No, they need to have their own fancy rocket ships as well. And they've made it their mission to fly to space in some capacity and do it before all of the other billionaires do it. Well, guess what? This is good news for NASA. SpaceX was founded in 2002 by Elon Musk. Google says Space Exploration Technologies Corp. is an American spacecraft manufacturer, space launch provider, and a satellite communications corporation headquartered in Hawthorne, California. It was founded in 2002 by Elon Musk with the goal of reducing space transportation costs to enable the colonization of Mars. NASA is probably loving the sound of that last bit there. Reducing space transportation costs? At the end of the day, NASA's whole mission isn't to worry about costs and other things. It's research. They want to research space and learn more about it. If I'm NASA, then I'm looking over at Elon Musk and thinking that this guy might be a really nice guy to get close to. Let Elon Musk do all the work and fit the bill of going to space, and you can tag along for the ride and complete your mission of researching stuff along the way. If someone else is gonna do all the legwork for me, then it honestly just makes sense that I sit back and strap in for the ride. Billionaires, for whatever reason, have decided that they want to take the reins on this one, and I think NASA is happy to let them. And number 1 on this list is money. Even NASA, one of the richest organizations in the world and a group that is tackling problems such as space travel, runs into money problems. At the end of the day, our society is built on the back of the mighty dollar, and if you don't have enough of said dollars, then you're not going to be able to do what you want to do. Every time NASA launches a space shuttle to go into space, literally every single time, that is going to cost $450 million. That's just one space shuttle going on one single mission. Now, $450 million is a lot of money, but to a big corporation, that could be considered chump change if you think about it. McDonald's, for instance, is thought to spend over $1 billion every year on advertising in the United States alone. That's just on advertising, let alone all the money they spend on the actual product and labor and transportation and everything that goes into making their business run. However, McDonald's makes a lot of money off of those advertisements. They pump the money into silly commercials, and we pump our money into poorly made burgers. This sort of business model doesn't really translate to space travel though. At the end of the day, $450 million is nothing if that $450 million is being spent on an operation that could bring in $1 billion, let's say. But in this case, that $450 million isn't being spent on that. That money is being spent, and then they aren't getting any of it back. There aren't any McDonald's in space, and there isn't any willing customers to spend money on stuff up there. In fact, there really isn't anything there at all. Throughout history, people go where the money is. Usually, it doesn't even matter how dangerous things are. Mining for oil or coal was extremely dangerous back in the early days, but there was a lot of money in it, and therefore people did it. There just simply is not a lot of money currently to be found in space. If, for instance, someone discovered a rare and valuable mineral or rock that's sitting on the moon and it was something that people would pay lots of money for, then I guarantee NASA would be up and running and sending tons of space shuttles to the moon. I think maybe the thing that's so unsettling about this is that we could be missing out on tons of human progress, but money is holding us back. Like, maybe there are some really important things to be learned in space that we could be learning about right now if money wasn't a factor. Hopefully somebody is ready to fork over the big bucks soon and we can get some people back up in the air.
And number 5, Jupiter's magnetosphere. NASA's spacecraft Juno picked up some of Jupiter's noises as it entered the planet's magnetic field. Now, according to NASA, the magnetosphere is where the movement of particles in space is controlled by what's going on inside of the planet. Juno's principal investigator Scott Bolton said of the event back in June of 2016, I quote, "We've just crossed the boundary into Jupiter's home turf. We're closing in fast fast on the planet itself and already gaining valuable data. Now this recording captured the encounter with the bow shock over the course of 2 hours, and it's pretty mysterious and eerie sounding. Moving on to number 4, plasma waves. As NASA aptly stated, space is not empty, nor is it silent. Nobody can hear you scream in space. Space contains a whole lot of energetic charged particles, which behave a lot differently than what we have on Earth. In magnetic fields, including the ones that surround Earth, there are particles that are constantly tossed around by the motion of electromagnetic waves that are known as plasma waves. And the ones that exist in space make some really interesting noises. Give it a listen. Some sound like roaring waves, while others sound a little bit like whistling. I think the whistling might even be a little bit creepier. Moving on to number 3, comet encounter. In February of 2011, NASA's Stardust spacecraft flew by a comet called Tempel 1 and pelted a bunch of small rocks and dust particles at it. This is what it sounds like. Now the full audio track is only a fraction of what NASA says was an approximate 5,000 total impacts on the spacecraft over the course of around 11 minutes. Would not want to be that spacecraft. Scientists believe that the flying debris was formed by fragmenting balls of ice and dust. And what's even cooler, this actually helped inform a theory that icy dust balls that leave a comet continually break up in space. Imagine breaking up with your comet only to slam right into a spacecraft. Rough life. And at number 2, Ganymede. Back in 1996, on June 27th, NASA's Galileo spacecraft made its first flyby of Ganymede, which is Jupiter's largest moon. Now the sound that you're about to hear are the translated radio signals that represent data from Galileo's plasma wave experiment instrument. Pretty freaky, eh? Galileo's encounter with Ganymede was pretty monumental in the way that we look at our solar system, and it discovered many things about Jupiter and its moons, including that Jupiter has an intense radiation belt above its cloud tops, helium in roughly the same concentration as the Sun, and a lot of extensive and rapid resurfacing of the moon load due to volcanism and Ganymede's magnetic field. Neat stuff. And finally, in our number 1 spot, Saturn's radio emissions. This one is perhaps the most eerie. So Saturn is a source of intense radio emissions according to NASA. They monitored it with the Cassini spacecraft, and the radio waves it picked up were closely related to the auroras near the poles of Saturn, which are kinda similar to the northern and southern lights that we have on Earth. Take a listen. Sounds like something straight out of a horror film, doesn't it? Ugh, nightmare fuel. According to the researchers working with Cassini, I quote, "All of the structures we observe in Saturn's radio spectrum are giving us clues about what might be going on in the source of the radio emission above Saturn's auroras. We believe that the changing frequencies are related to tiny radio sources moving up and down along Saturn's magnetic fields." Now at the time, scientists couldn't agree on a theory to explain the phenomenon, but noted how amazing it was that the radio emissions on Saturn sounded so similar to what was on Earth. Weird.
Starting off this countdown, we have Apollo 1. On January 27th, 1964, a fire took the lives of 3 astronauts during a launch rehearsal test. A damaged wire was the cause of this fire. Then a spark in the spacecraft ignited a flame. The high-pressure pure oxygen environment was the perfect catalyst for a fire to start. Then the foam pads and nylon netting in the craft added fuel to the fire. 4 astronauts struggled to get out and ended up perishing in the flames. Their last communication went as so. Ed White yelled "fire" into his headset. Then Gus Grissom yelled, "I've got a fire in the cockpit." Then the 3rd astronaut, Roger Chaffee, yelled "fire" as well. The last thing they all said was "get us out." This transmission was then followed by their screams as they were engulfed in the flames. The last thing they said was a plea for help for somebody to get them out of there before they died. Oh, that is so dark. It just sends shivers down my spine. In our 4th spot, we have the Lost Cosmonaut. Back in the 1950s, 2 brothers, Achille and Giovanni Giudica, were working as amateur radio operators. They gathered together old gear and set up shop in an old bunker.
in 1960, they came across something pretty terrifying. So they claimed that they got signals from a Soviet cosmonaut that was lost in space. Apparently, she was returning to Earth's orbit when everything began to go wrong. Her spacecraft was malfunctioning, and in the recording, the woman, speaking in Russian, is pleading for help, saying it's getting hot. Then the spacecraft bursts into flames. Thankfully, they saved the recording so that they could share it with others. Now, the Soviets denied this, saying that it was an unmanned craft that burned. But the thing is, a lot of cosmonauts died during the space race. But the Soviet Union refused to reveal those deaths. Half the time, they would just cover them up. So it could be that this recording is real and captures the last moments of this woman pleading for her life. Moving on to number 3, we have the Soyuz 11. On June 6, 1971, 3 Soviet cosmonauts launched into space. Their goal was to make a record for the longest time spent in space. Sadly, the mission failed and they became the first people to die in space. Now, the spacecraft landed perfectly, but when the team opened the hatch, they found all 3 crew members dead. Their faces filled with dark blue spots and blood dripping from their ears and noses. What happened was their breathing ventilation valve ruptured. They died from decompression. They died within seconds. It happened so fast that they couldn't even get a word out. So I'm kind of cheating by putting this one on the list, but the last thing heard from them was a gasp for air, then a weird popping sound, probably from the air in their lungs expanding from the drop in air pressure and being exposed to the vacuum of space. To me, that is more terrifying than hearing them plead for mercy. Like, you're literally hearing them die. In our second spot, we have Vladimir Komarov. Vladimir Komarov was a Soviet test pilot, aerospace engineer, and cosmonaut. In 1967, he was sent on the Soyuz 1. The mission ended very badly, though. Here's the thing. The spacecraft was very faulty. There was 203 structural problems with it. The thing is, Vladimir kind of didn't have a choice. He was forced to go on this mission. If he didn't go, then the backup pilot, who was his best friend, would have to go. And he said he didn't want to do that to his friend, so he went and sacrificed his life instead. Wow, that's just true friend goals right there. What a hero. Anyways, once he began to orbit Earth, a number of issues began to happen, like the antennas didn't open properly. It was his re-entry into Earth that killed him, though. On April 24th, 1967, Vladimir crashed full speed into Earth after a parachute failure. Only a chipped heel bone survived the crash. His body was found as a badly charred lump. On his way down, translators heard him say, "Heat is rising in the capsule." He then began to curse the people who put him inside of this botched spaceship. He was yelling, saying that they killed him. His final moments were him crying and cursing in rage. As a result of this incident, Vladimir became the first human to die on a space mission. Imagine hearing those final moments, though. That would just change your life forever. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Challenger. On January 28th, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart during the flight. It happened only 73 seconds into the flight. This resulted in the death of all 7 crew members on board. The crew consisted of 5 NASA astronauts and 2 payload specialists. Basically, what happened was at 11:39 a.m., the shuttle started to break down over the Atlantic Ocean. It started because of a failure of the O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster. From there, the right solid rocket booster failed during takeoff. Then the force of the takeoff basically caused the rocket to break apart. Now, it's thought that some crew survived the initial breakup, but the impact onto the ocean surface would have killed them. The last words came from pilot Michael J. Smith. All they heard was him say, "uh-oh," before they lost communication with them altogether. It's believed that the uh-oh came after they felt a huge jolt from the shuttle breaking apart. That's the last thing he ever said. It was later retrieved from the flight deck tape recorder from the ocean floor 2 months after this incident. Now, here's where it gets even darker and twisted. Apparently, a secret tape was leaked from NASA. On this tape, it was revealed that the recording continued on after the uh-oh. After that, you could hear someone yelling, "What happened? What happened? Oh God, no." And then you could hear screams and cries. Someone began to pray, others began to curse. One of the astronauts can be heard saying, "Can't breathe," choking. Another can be heard yelling, "We are dead." Now, apparently this is a hoax and the tape has been debunked, But some NASA employees have admitted to hearing way more after the uh-oh, and NASA is just covering it up.
Number 5 on this list is that green orb. Major Gordon Cooper was one of the earliest American astronauts there was. He was the last astronaut to ever fly in space completely by himself, a feat that's honestly just terrifying if you ask me. While he was out there in space, Cooper saw something that he couldn't explain and something that just doesn't make any sense. It was a rapidly approaching green orb, something that was actually picked up by the radar system that was tracking him in Australia. He couldn't fully make out what it was, but he knew that it was a big object and that it was glowing green. Cooper has since come out and discussed his strong belief in UFOs and aliens. It turns out that UFO sightings are not as uncommon as we may think for astronauts or the government, that these sightings happen very frequently and are very often covered up. For many years, I have lived with a secret, and a secrecy imposed on all specialists in astronautics. I can now reveal that every day in the USA, our radar instruments capture objects of form and composition unknown to us. And there are thousands of witness reports and a quantity of documents to prove this, but nobody wants to make them public. Why? Because authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means. Now that's a direct quotation from Major Gordon Cooper discussing the truth behind his sighting and many other sightings that the government makes on the daily. If this is factual and the government actually does see these anomalies all the time, then it's totally reasonable to believe Cooper saw a real-life UFO while he was in space that time. It should also be noted that when he landed, he was told that reporters were not allowed to ask him about his sighting and to keep it under wraps. Seems to me like these astronauts and the government know some stuff that they don't want getting out. Number 4 on this list is space snakes. Franklin Story Musgrave is a former NASA astronaut who spent over 53 days in space. He's extremely intelligent, having 6 separate degrees, and definitely knows about space since he went on 6 separate missions there. That's why when he came out and spoke about seeing a massive space-like eel up there, it really shocked the world. On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It's rubbery because it has internal waves in it and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there. Some incredibly primitive, more primitive, some just proteins coming together, amino acids, and some just single-cell organisms and other civilizations that have been around for 1,000,000 years that are doing unimaginable kinds of things. 6, 7, 8 feet long. You heard that right, guys. I know that he goes on to talk about proteins coming together and stuff, but that seems like a lot more than just a few amino acids to me. That's a big creature that he saw not only one time, but on 2 very separate and different occasions. This is a full-on NASA astronaut who is super well educated, coming out and talking about a massive eel in space. Now, he's the only one who's come out and spoken about such things. However, there was a picture released from the Mars rover with potential evidence of a snake. Take a look at that image right there. That looks a lot like a snake to me, and if there's one chilling on Mars, then there's no reason to think that there couldn't be one in space either. If this is true, then more astronauts definitely must know about this, and they must be trying to keep it under wraps for a reason. Maybe they don't want the public to freak out about these space snakes, maybe they're just scared of them themselves and aren't ready to release the info yet. But whatever the case may be, it's starting to look like our slithering pals aren't just here on Earth. Number 3 on this list is the fake moon landing. Now, before I continue with this entry, I do just want to say that we are entering theoretical land right now. Personally, I think the moon landing was real. I'd like to believe that humans made it to the moon back in 1969. Like, that just seems really cool to me, and I do think that it actually happened. However, if, for instance, the moon landing was fake, just going down this rabbit hole for a second, if the moon landing was fake, then that would automatically be a really scary secret that astronauts don't want us to know about. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are 2 of the most well-known names in history, and certainly the most well-known astronauts. Well, if the moon landing was fake, then these guys were obviously in on it. In fact, all of NASA would have been in on it. close to 20% of Americans still think that the moon landing was faked and that it was just one big elaborate fib. The biggest argument that moon landing conspiracy theorists have is that America had a massive motive to beat the Soviet Union there, and also that there would have been film technology good enough to fake the entire thing. This isn't necessarily proof though, it's just kind of speculation, and that's why personally, I do think that the moon landing happened. But on the off chance that these conspiracy theorists are correct and the moon landing was actually fake and was just actually doctored footage, then that may just be the biggest secret that astronauts don't want us to know about. Number 2 on this list is space pee. Okay, so I know how that sounds. No, I'm not talking about some evil urine alien that somebody spotted or some massive pee planet. But this entry is just more about how hard it is to actually live up there in space and the realities of the situation. Also, I guess this is less of a secret, but more of something that just doesn't get talked about enough considering how much it must suck. But listen to this statistic, guys. If you want to go into space and live up there for 1 year, which I frankly don't really understand why you would want to do, but anyways, let's assume that you do want to do that. If you want to go live there for 1 year, then you're gonna need to drink 730 liters of your own urine and sweat. 730 liters. That is 730 milk bags worth of your own excrement that you now need to consume. Now, I obviously have to point out that this is recycled urine and recycled sweat, so you don't need to just pee in a cup and then take a sip or anything like that. But this just goes to show how difficult it is to come by water in space. It's so difficult to get water that we literally need to constantly reuse what we have in our bodies already. Like, you basically never get any new water in your system for an entire year if you go to space. You're just reusing the old water over and over and over again. Honestly, after hearing this stat, guys, I have no idea how these billionaires think that we're getting to Mars. Like, sure, build a ship that can take us there, manufacture a shelter that could withstand the elements, but how about water, dudes? You know, that thing that we need? I don't want to move to Mars and just live off of pee for the rest of my life. Anyways, big respect to the astronauts out there who have to do this for a whole year. You guys are way stronger than me. Finally, number 1 on this list is changing DNA. This one is definitely a weird one and honestly pretty scary. Ranker writes, astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent a year at the International Space Station in 2016, returned to find that he was 2 inches taller than his departing height. The new physical differences between Kelly and his identical brother Mike, also an astronaut, were startling. Scientists compared the DNA of the two and found that, besides growing 2 inches, Kelly's gut bacteria were completely different and his gene expression had changed. Scientists concluded that the changes were caused by the stresses of space travel, which can cause changes in a cell's biological pathways. Although Kelly eventually returned to his original height, his other genetic changes are seemingly irreversible, meaning Kelly and his brother are no longer identical twins. So that's honestly pretty insane. If we go to space, our DNA can just literally change on us. Obviously, we have no idea how this works, but think about the potential that this could have. Is it possible to harness this ability? To be able to send someone into space and cure a disease that they were born with? Like, this truly feels like some Fantastic Four level stuff right here, where we can actually change our human makeup. Granted, we need to look at it from the other angle as well. Could this be extremely detrimental? Yeah, I think it definitely could. You could go into space and then have your DNA totally change on you in a way that's for the worse, causing you lifelong problems after that. I had no idea that this was something that could happen in space, but it's definitely something that we need to do some more research on because, like, it could be wild.